So for this video, we're going to review for your open notes quiz. So in your open notes quiz, you're going to have to do 2 of these problems that we're about to do. And basically what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to solve a quadratic equation 3 different ways. So if you're solving the same quadratic equation, but you're doing it using 3 different methods, you should still get the same answers. So when I solve this, I'm going to solve it by factoring, completing the square, and then quadratic formula. So you guys will have one very similar to this on your quiz, and then you'll have 2 of them that are very similar to this. Keep in mind it's open notes, so you're going to want to take very good notes during this video so that you have great notes to use on your open notes quiz. So first thing we want to do is we're going to solve this by factoring. So let me first just copy down my equation that I'm looking at. X squared minus 2x equals 48. And if I'm solving by factoring, what you have to remember for factoring is that you always have to get your equation equal to 0. So you got to set your equation equal to 0. So in order to do that, it means I got to bring the 48 over. It's very similar to quadratic formula, where you have to have your quadratic in standard form, and it has to be equal to 0. So it's the same format required for quadratic formula. And then what you need to do is you need to do the x factor, because this is a trinomial, and you have a leading coefficient of 1, which means it's just a regular x factor, not Liam's favorite slide and divide, just an x factor. So we have -2 up top here, -48. And then we go to Ayana's thing where you can do 3, 3, 1. So you can 3, 3, 1 and then type in 1, -2, -48 for your coefficients. Or you can do what Sarah likes to do, which is by hand. So I'm adding to -2 and I'm multiplying to -48. So I have to have opposite signs. So when I'm trying to multiply to 48, I'm thinking 6 and 8, and the negative has to be 8 and the positive has to be 6. So that I add to -2. So then my factors are going to be x plus 6 and x minus 8. And now I can split this, set each piece equal to 0, and solve them. So if you subtract 6 from both sides, you get x equals -6, which is what you're getting from the calculator. And then this is going to be x equals +8 after you add 8 to both sides. So remember, when you do 3, 3, 1 in the calculator, I think Liam's a big fan of that as well. You have to remember you get the answers, the solutions from the calculator, or the zeros, and then you have to flip the signs to get the factors because they're always opposite. So we get x equals -6. I'm just going to fix this so it actually looks like a -6. So x equals -6 and x equals 8. So those should be the same solutions for these other 2 methods. So the next one here, solve by completing the square. So this is different to start, where you have to first set it equal to the number. So instead of setting it equal to 0, you got to have your equation equal to the number. So I'm going to start with my equation again. X squared minus 2x equals 48. And remember, it's got to be equal to the number. So in this case, my quadratic is equal to a number. So I'm ready to complete the square. So now I'm going to, down here, I'm just going to write x squared minus 2x, keep the signs, plus the square equals 48 plus the square. Okay, so we're going to remember to have our square and our square to tell us that we have whatever we add to one side, we have to add to the other. Now we're going to actually complete the square. So up here, I'm going to draw in my square. We split up x squared, so we get x and x. We split up -2, so -1, -1. So then the number that I really care about is this number right here. So -1 times -1 is going to be +1. So that's what I'm going to add to both sides. Now, if you wanted to fill in the rest of these, you can. You just don't really have to. So now remember that the sides of your square is what goes in parentheses. So it's going to be x minus 1 all squared equals, and then you just add these up. 48 plus 1 gives me 49. Now we can solve it using the square root method. So square root both sides. We get x minus 1 equals plus or minus 7 when you take the square root of 49. So plus or minus, because remember we took the square root of an x squared. Now I can split this up into my two cases. So I have x minus 1 equals positive 7, and then x minus 1 equals negative 7. Now remember, I keep that minus 1 because that minus 1 came from right here. So I have to keep that, and it's the 7 that has 1 positive, 1 negative. So now we're going to add 1 to both sides. So those cancel. We get x equals 8. And then add 1 to both sides here. We get x equals negative 6. And if you look, same answers as what we got up there. So that means we've done it correctly because we got the same answers solving the same equation using two different methods. So then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to solve this, but we're going to solve it using the quadratic formula. So this was the last thing that we learned. So quadratic formula is just like when you solve by factoring. You got to have the same setup for these two. I'm just going to make a note. Same setup. Where completing the squared is the one that's a little bit different. So for quadratic formula, you got to have it set equal to 0. It's got to be in standard form. So I'm going to start with our original equation. X squared minus 2x equals 48. And I got to get it equal to 0. So that means I have x squared minus 2x, and I'm going to subtract over the 48. Identify A, B, and C. So A is the number in front of x squared, which there's really a 1 there. So A is 1. B, keep the negative 2, negative 48. I'm going to write down the formula here. Actually, let me write it over here. You're going to want this for your quiz, so make sure that you're copying it carefully. So negative B plus or minus square root B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. So now I'm just going to rewrite this, but I'm going to put parentheses wherever I have a letter. Okay, so now we're going to replace. So we have our first letter here is B, so I'm going to replace it with what B is, which is negative 2. Again, B, so negative 2. A, which is 1. C is negative 48. And then A here is a 1. So x equals, simplify this first part here. So negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 2. And then keep the plus or minus. So it's 2 plus or minus square root. Now you're going to simplify everything underneath the square root, paying attention to the signs. Again, this is a minus. When you enter it into your calculator, don't use the negative symbol, or your calculator automatically goes to multiplication. If you're not sure if you use the right symbol, you'll see a little dot if you use multiplication, and it'll mean it's multiplying. So just make sure there's not a dot in front of it so you know that your calculator is actually subtracting. So then when you do that, you should be getting 196. On the bottom here, when we simplify that, we end up with 2. And then keep your division symbol. And now the square root of 196, that's a perfect square. It's going to end up being 14. So I'm just going to, you might have to do yours on the side or go to the back of your paper. So now when I go to simplify it, I get 2 plus or minus 14 over 2. And this is where I'm going to have two cases again, since I have square root of 196 came out to be a whole number. I'm going to actually find the two numbers. So it's going to be 2 plus 14 over 2, and then 2 minus 14 over 2. Because we can actually simplify this versus leaving it as a radical. If this was a non-perfect square, then we would keep it in this format. So now 2 plus 14 gives me 16 over 2. So we get 8. That's a good sign because I've gotten that for the other ones. 2 minus 14, negative 12 over 2. Good sign, I'm getting -6. So again, same answer, different method of solving. So in the end, all three methods will get you the answer or get you the same answers, but we just still have to know how to do all the different methods, because remember, quadratic formula always works, but sometimes factoring is a quicker way. For this type of problem, I would definitely recommend, like, if you were able to choose which method, I would say factoring. It was way quicker. But for the sake of your open notes quiz, I'm testing that you can do all three methods. So make sure that you have this paper when you're taking your quiz. And good luck, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.